It was a routine traffic stop, or so it seemed, when Officer Daniel Hargrove flashed his lights and pulled over Aisha Carter's sedan on a quiet stretch of highway. The air was thick with tension, but Aisha, a 32-year-old paralegal with a sharp mind and a steady hand, knew something was off the moment Hargrove approached her window. Little did he know, the woman he targeted was carrying a secret that would unravel his career in seconds, a federal warrant with his name written all over it. Aisha was driving home from a late night at the office, her mind preoccupied with a case she'd been working on for weeks. The clock on her dashboard read 9:47 p.m., and the road was nearly empty, save for the occasional passing truck. She noticed the patrol car tailing her for about a mile before its red and blue lights lit up the night. She pulled over, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her heart rate steady but her senses on high alert. She'd been stopped before. Most black women in her city had at least one story, but this felt different. Hargrove's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and his voice carried an edge of authority that bordered on menace. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he said, his tone clipped. Aisha complied, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. She knew the drill. Stay calm, don't argue, keep your hands visible. Hargrove, a stocky man in his late 30s with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, asked for her license and registration. She handed them over, her eyes never leaving his face. He scanned the documents, then gestured toward her car. "Mind if I take a look inside?" It wasn't really a question. Aisha nodded, her jaw tight. She had nothing to hide, or so she thought. Hargrove moved to the passenger side, his flashlight sweeping over the seats. Aisha stood by the driver's door, watching him closely. He opened the glove compartment, rummaged through it, then reached under the passenger seat. His hand emerged holding a small plastic bag filled with white powder. He held it up, his lips curling into a smirk. "Care to explain this?" he asked, his voice dripping with accusation. Aisha's stomach dropped, but not for the reason Hargrove expected. She knew that bag wasn't hers. She didn't do drugs, didn't sell them, didn't touch them. Her car was clean, she made sure of it. Yet there it was, dangling in Hargrove's gloved hand like a trophy. Her mind raced, piecing together the situation. This wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. And she wasn't about to let it slide. "Officer," she said, her voice calm but firm, "that's not mine." Hargrove raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "That's what they all say," he replied, tossing the bag onto the hood of her car. He started reading her rights, his words mechanical, as if he'd done this 100 times before. But Aisha wasn't listening. She was reaching into her purse, her fingers closing around a folded piece of paper she'd carried for weeks, waiting for a moment like this. "Before you continue," she interrupted, her voice cutting through his recitation, "you might want to take a look at this." She unfolded the document and held it out. Hargrove paused, his eyes narrowing as he took it from her. The smirk faded as he read the first line. It was a federal warrant issued by a U.S. District Court, and it named him, Daniel Hargrove, as the subject of an ongoing investigation for evidence tampering and corruption. Aisha watched his face change, the color draining from his cheeks. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just stood there, her arms crossed, waiting for him to process what he was holding. The warrant detailed allegations that Hargrove had been planting evidence on suspects for years, targeting people he thought wouldn't fight back. But Aisha wasn't just anyone. She worked for a law firm that specialized in civil rights cases, and she'd been quietly building a case against Hargrove for months, ever since a client mentioned his name in connection with a similar incident. Hargrove's hands trembled slightly as he read the document. He looked up at Aisha, his eyes wide with something between fear and disbelief. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice no longer steady. Aisha didn't flinch. "I've been working with federal investigators," she said. "They've been watching you for a while, officer. That bag you just found. It's going to be the last piece of evidence they need." The highway was silent except for the hum of distant traffic. Hargrove stood frozen, the warrant still in his hand. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Aisha took a step closer, her voice low but unwavering. "You've been doing this for years, haven't you? Planting drugs, ruining lives, thinking no one would catch on. But I've got news for you. They're coming for you, and they're close." Hargrove's career began to unravel in his mind. He'd been a cop for 15 years, climbing the ranks in a small city police department where oversight was lax and loyalty was everything. He'd started small, shaking down low-level dealers, pocketing cash from traffic stops. But over time, he'd grown bolder, planting evidence to boost his arrest numbers, to make himself look like a hero. It worked too. Promotions came, commendations followed, and the department turned a blind eye to the whispers about his methods. He'd targeted people like Aisha, people he thought were vulnerable, people he assumed wouldn't have the resources or the nerve to fight back. But he'd miscalculated this time. Aisha's involvement with the case against Hargrove hadn't started with her. It began with a client, Marcus Reed, a 25-year-old mechanic who'd been arrested 2 years earlier after Hargrove claimed to find drugs in his truck. Marcus swore the drugs weren't his, but no one listened. He lost his job, his apartment, and nearly his freedom. Aisha's firm took his case pro bono, and during their investigation, they uncovered a pattern. Other clients, other stories, all pointing to Hargrove. Aisha spent late nights combing through court records, police reports, and witness statements, connecting the dots. She reached out to a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office, who confirmed that Hargrove was already on their radar. They needed hard evidence, though, something concrete to tie him to the planted drugs. Aisha agreed to help, knowing it was risky but necessary. She wasn't naive about the dangers. Hargrove wasn't working alone. He had allies in the department, cops who covered for him, maybe even shared in the profits. Aisha had taken precautions. Her car was equipped with a dash cam that recorded both the interior and exterior, and she always carried a burner phone to contact her federal liaison if things went south. The warrant she carried was a precaution, a way to protect herself if Hargrove ever targeted her. She hadn't expected it to happen so soon, but she was ready. Hargrove handed the warrant back to her, his face a mask of barely concealed panic. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Aisha tucked the document back into her purse. "It proves enough," she replied. "And that bag you planted. My dash cam caught every second of you putting it there. The feds will have that footage by morning." Hargrove's eyes darted to her car, as if he could see the camera through the windshield. He took a step back, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. Aisha didn't move. "Go ahead, call it in," she said. "But you might want to think about who's listening. The feds have been tapping your communications for weeks." That was a bluff. She didn't know if they were tapping him yet, but it hit its mark. Hargrove's hand froze, hovering over the radio. He was trapped, and he knew it. Aisha could see the calculations running through his head. Deny everything, double down, or try to talk his way out. He chose the third option. "Look," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Maybe we can work something out. You don't want to make enemies in this town." Aisha's laugh was sharp, cutting through the night air. "Enemies? You're the one with a federal warrant in your name, officer. I'm just doing my job." She pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and spoke clearly into it. "Agent Torres, it's Aisha. Hargrove just planted a bag in my car. I got the warrant and the dashcam footage is ready. Can you send someone out here?" Hargrove's face went white. He took another step back, his hand now resting on his holster, but he didn't draw his weapon. Aisha's heart pounded, but she kept her composure. She'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed it in her mind 100 times. She knew Hargrove was dangerous, but she also knew he was cornered. Cornered men made mistakes. Within minutes, the sound of sirens approached. 2 unmarked cars pulled up, and 3 men in suits stepped out. Aisha recognized Agent Torres, a tall, wiry man with a no-nonsense demeanor. He nodded to her, then turned to Hargrove. "Officer Hargrove," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "You're coming with us." Hargrove tried to protest, but the agents were already moving, one taking the bag of drugs from the hood of Aisha's car, another reading Hargrove his rights. Aisha watched as they cuffed him and led him to one of the cars. He didn't look at her, didn't say a word. The smirk was gone, replaced by a blank, defeated stare. Agent Torres approached Aisha as the other agent secured Hargrove. "You okay?" he asked. Aisha nodded. "I'm fine. Did you get the footage?" Torres smiled faintly. "We're pulling it now." "You did good, Aisha. This is the break we needed." The next few hours were a blur of paperwork and statements. Aisha sat in the back of an unmarked car, recounting the events to Torres and another agent. They confirmed that the dashcam footage clearly showed Hargrove planting the bag, and the warrant gave them enough to detain him pending further investigation. Aisha's role as a civilian informant would remain confidential, but she knew the risks wouldn't end with Hargrove's arrest. He had friends in the department, and they wouldn't take kindly to one of their own going down. By the time Aisha got home, it was nearly 2 a.m. She locked her door, checked the windows, and sat on her couch, the adrenaline finally fading. She thought about Marcus, about the others Hargrove had targeted, about the lives he'd ruined for his own gain. She thought about the warrant, now safely tucked away in her purse, and the power it represented, not just to take down one corrupt cop, but to send a message that no one was untouchable. The investigation into Hargrove expanded quickly. The dash cam footage was damning, and other victims came forward, emboldened by his arrest. Aisha's firm took on more cases, building a class action lawsuit against the department for systemic corruption. Hargrove's allies tried to close ranks, but the federal pressure was relentless. By the end of the month, 2 more officers were implicated, and the department was under scrutiny like never before. Aisha continued her work, quieter now, more cautious. She upgraded her home security, varied her routes to work, and kept her burner phone charged. She knew the fight wasn't over, but she also knew she'd struck a blow that wouldn't be forgotten. Hargrove was behind bars, facing charges that could put him away for decades. The bag he'd planted, meant to destroy her, had instead become his undoing. Months later, Aisha stood in a courtroom, watching as Hargrove was sentenced. The judge read off the charges: evidence tampering, perjury, conspiracy. Hargrove didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge the woman who'd brought him down. Aisha didn't need him to. She'd done what she set out to do, not for revenge but for justice. For Marcus, for the others, for herself. As she left the courthouse, the weight of the past year settled on her shoulders, but it was lighter now. The warrant, the footage, the late nights, they'd all been worth it. Aisha Carter wasn't just a paralegal. She was a force, and she'd made sure Hargrove and anyone else watching knew it.